In the northwest of Saudi Arabia, these enigmatic dwellings have dominated the lunar landscape for more than 2,000 years. The finely chiseled rocky facades seem to have been hewn out of a haphazard mass of stone. This is the ancient city of Hegra, a city forbidden to visitors for hundreds of years. These huge tombs, sculpted from the rock itself, resemble those of the renowned Petra in southern Jordan, the capital city of the Nabateans. Between the two cities lie 700 kilometers of desert. But what do we really know about the Nabatean civilization? A people of caravanners who emerged from Arabia's desert sands around 4 centuries BC.
There is little that enables us to envisage the Nabateans, apart from 2 accounts made some 200 years apart by Diodorus of Sicily and Strabon. Diodorus described them as a nomadic, freedom-loving people which lived in the desert, capable of surviving without building settlements, by traveling from one water source to the next. A couple of centuries later, Strabon contradicted this by saying that the Nabateans built houses everywhere, indeed luxurious homes, and they sought and appreciated great wealth.
The Greek authors also say that the Nabateans were very good at escaping into the desert if they were under attack from anybody else. But probably the thing that they're associated with most closely is the camel-based caravan trade over long distances.
The Nabatean caravans, heavily laden with myrrh, incense and spices from India and Arabia, crossed the desert of the Hejaz from south to north. They brought their precious wares to the frontiers of the Greek and Roman empires, venturing as far as the Mediterranean ports of Gaza and Great Alexandria.
Incense was used for cult, for offerings to gods, but also in medicines and in fumigation, because they used it simply to make their houses smell better. So it was in great demand, and the Romans had an almost infinite capacity to consume this incense. The Nabateans, maybe they saw the opportunity, a niche opportunity to take control of these trade routes. This is speculation really, because we don't know what prompted them to settle down and form a state. But certainly they were immediately very successful. When the Greeks come into contact with the Nabateans in 312 BC, the Nabateans are already known to be very rich because of their success in trade.
The nomadic traders were soon reputed for the abundance of their merchandise and became the object of widespread jealous interest. Concern for safety led them to seek out a natural refuge, a haven in the very heart of a jagged and formidable mass of pink rock named Petra, from the Greek word for stone. Access required a perilous journey through a sinuous, narrow gorge between sheer cliffs stretching up 300 meters and acting as defensive walls for an impressive natural fortress. It was here that they built their capital. the city of Petra was hidden from view. A citadel camouflaged to such an extent that at the dawn of the Middle Ages, it had been all but forgotten. It was rediscovered only in the early 19th century by a Swiss traveller, Burckhardt, who once again braved the 2-kilometre entranceway, the Sieg. He emerged unscathed and awestruck before the extraordinary facade of the Kasne.
It represents a cultural shock. In this magnificent rocky and mountainous site, to find extremely sophisticated sculptures, very similar and equally beautiful as those to be found in Alexandria, and evoking in certain aspects the Hellenistic sculpture of Pergamum, whereas we're in the middle of the desert.
Entranced by the strange nature of the site, Petra's first explorers were immediately struck by the impressive number of tombs carved out of the cliff face. The site was for a long time regarded as an immense necropolis. And yet over 2,000 years ago, Petra was a veritable city, with residential areas, markets, streets, and craftsmen's workshops, as well as temples where the Nabatean gods were honored and worshipped.
It's a curious and paradoxical site for establishing a town. The resources required for sustaining a substantial community were sadly lacking in this isolated enclave. And in particular, the supply of water was a considerable problem.
The Nabateans demonstrated their genius by using the surrounding hillsides as a huge basin to collect the scant rainfall. The site's 92 square kilometers are honeycombed with hydraulic installations. A network of channels and conduits was built or carved in the rock, and every drop of rain was thus guided to reservoirs where the water was stored.
They showed here that they were great masters of the art of hydraulics. Perhaps they owed this skill to their nomadic origins and the fact that in the desert it is vital not to let a single drop of water evaporate.
3,000 monuments have been referenced on the archaeological map of Petra, drawn up by Laila Nehme. At its height, the town would have been home to several tens of thousands of inhabitants. Using these relics and clues, the archaeologists are today attempting to piece together the puzzle of Nabatean history. But 170 years of research have brought more questions than answers. The renowned Kasne, which decorates the entrance to the city, is still very much a mystery. Was it a royal tomb or perhaps a temple? When exactly was it carved into the rock? And what religious beliefs led the Nabateans to literally move mountains, leaving only an enigmatic symbol of their god?
Obviously, if we had a history of the Nabatean kingdom, like Josephus's history of the Judean kingdom, which was contemporary with the Nabatean kingdom. But maybe, certainly for me, what would be most valuable and most interesting would be to have some, even a small fragment of the religious literature of the Nabateans. We have the names of gods, we have temples, lots of religious dedications when somebody makes an offering to the gods. But we really don't understand anything about the mythology or the way that people prayed or praised their gods. And even a small fragment of material of this kind, it would be wonderful to have such a thing.
Where can new clues be found? Perhaps on the very frontiers of the Nabatean kingdom, towards the south, in ancient Hegra, the gateway to their realm. Today called Madain Saleh, the starting point for the Nabatean caravans more than 2,000 years ago, remained out of sight for several centuries.
Madain Saleh is a site that has inspired generations of archaeologists, and there are a good many who would love to come and work here because it is still something of a myth. After Petra, it is the most important site because it is Nabatean par excellence.
If Madain Saleh is legendary, it's also because a fatwa hangs over the site, a curse which has transformed it into forbidden territory. Legend tells how it was once inhabited by the Thamudaeans, a somewhat perverted people to whom God sent the prophet Saleh in an attempt to reconcile them. Incredulous, the Thamudaeans asked for a sign to confirm his divine mission. In order to convince them, Saleh performed a miracle. He made a she-camel appear from a rock. During the day, it followed the passage from Mabrak to Nakwa and grazed on the plain. At night, it gave an abundant supply of milk to all the inhabitants. But instead of converting, the Thamudaeans decided to get rid of the animal. They fixed daggers to the narrow walls of the passage, and the beast was cut to shreds. It succumbed to its wounds, bellowing and moaning in pain. A baby camel emerged from its belly and changed into a rock. The wrath of God descended on the Thamudaeans, and they were all destroyed. The Quran refers to this legend, and even today many Muslims avoid the cursed site. In the tall Nabatean facades, the Thamudaeans' former homes, they see only the assassins of the miraculous she-camel. The site, therefore, lay untouched for hundreds of years. At the beginning of the 20th century, two Dominican priests from a religious school in Jerusalem rediscovered Madain Saleh. Antonin Jossin and Raphael Savignac were fully fledged Oriental explorers. For years they traveled across the Holy Land, the Sinai, Jordan, and Syria. Jossin exploited his knowledge of ethnology and epigraphy, as well as his linguistic skills, notably in Arabic, which he taught. Savignac developed a talent in photography as he illustrated their accounts for scientific publications. In 1907, they were entrusted with a mission from the French Society for Archaeological Exploration and returned to Arabia. The Hejaz railway line linking Damascus with Arabia's holy cities had just been completed. The two Dominicans joined the flow of pilgrims heading for Mecca. They would be the first to rediscover the former city of Hegra. After several days of tireless work on the site, they completed an account which even today stands as a reference for researchers. They described everything they saw and took the first photographs of unseen relics, which would be the stuff of dreams for generations of archaeologists. 100 years later, a French team is now finally able to follow in Jossin and Savignac's footsteps. Archaeologist and epigraphist Laila Neme from France's National Scientific Research Center is in charge of the expedition. It's the first time a foreign team has been authorized by the Saudi government to work on the site. It has taken several long years to prepare and organize the project. The multidisciplinary team has only a few weeks to evaluate the site with regards to Jossin and Savignac's work, and perhaps to find new inscriptions, clues, and information. Far from the tortuous red cliffs of Petra, Hegra extends over a vast sandy plain studded with yellow stone outcrops, most of which have been sculpted with tombs, the exception being Jebel Itlib, designated as a religious area. It's here that Laila starts to explore, accompanied by the topographer Thomas Arnoux.
The criteria for identifying the presence of the Nabateans over an area that stretches as far as Damascus and the Saudi Hejaz include, on one hand, ceramics, which are found in numbers on the various sites, and on the other hand, architectural elements and different representations of divinities. But there is also writing, of course, the Nabatean writing, which can be found in almost identical forms from the Sinai to southern Syria. The writing is a derivation of Aramaic. Aramaic as it was practiced in the chancery of the Persian Empire, but it very quickly developed its own characteristics, which render it immediately recognizable.
Jean-Claude Bessac, the stoneworking specialist, accompanied by archaeologist Nasser Zaid, explores the Al-Kuraymat tomb area to the west of the site. Unlike Petra, where erosion has seriously damaged the edifices, Hegra has been miraculously spared by the ravages of time and the elements. The facades that emerge from the rock still bear the fine traces of the stoneworkers' tools.
So here, for example, on one side on the right, we have grooves that are sloping and quite wide apart, whereas on the left, the grooves are almost vertical and quite close together. So what does this indicate? That the work was shared between two stone cutters, one who worked on the right side and one who worked on the left side. What is very surprising is that in the ancient world, the only place where we have the names of the stoneworkers is here in Hegra. So there must have been a certain consideration for the craftsman's expertise, and it's, say, the craftsman's place in society that didn't exist elsewhere.
Can you give me the total height of the niche, please?
162.
In Petra, it's similar. There may be one or two niches where we can see eagles, but that's all, so it must have been a symbol of power. Elsewhere in Syria, it's associated with Bal Shamid, but this is a pattern we can find quite often, and there's a kind of garland below, you see, beneath the wings, with two small holes, as if something were attached there.
They didn't want to cut into the actual rock itself. Technically, it's impossible to start at the bottom and work upwards, even with the steepest parts. A natural fault had to be found, which formed a kind of ledge in the mountainside to be able to reach the summit. The little notches here were for access, which was as always from the top, particularly as each part, each horizontal layer, had to be fully completed, as they couldn't come back. Scaffolding was out of the question. There's not a lot of wood here, so scaffolding was ruled out. With this tomb, they made a definite choice with regard to the exceptional position of this mushroom-like mass of sandstone, hoping it would be visible from a great distance, isolated, and therefore more ostentatious. But they also knew they were taking a gamble and risked coming across the wrong kind of rock, and that's why they stopped. The bad rock hindered them, and they had to give up when they encountered the difficult strata. If they had succeeded, they would have had one of the most impressive tombs, if not the most impressive, compared to its neighbors. The most visible from a distance, with the best orientation, and above all, the most isolated, so it would have distinguished the person who built it.
How did a people who were originally nomadic manage to build such aesthetically distinctive masterpieces? The archaeologists would appear to be in agreement. The Nabateans adopted certain decorative elements from neighboring cultures, as testified by the facades of the tombs. The design is in layers, freely combining Egyptian cornices, Mesopotamian merlons, and doors and pilasters with Greco-Roman influences.
A number of very skilled people were brought in, who had trained in the major cultural centers of the Eastern Mediterranean. We can also suppose that local personnel were trained who copied them. Either they were trained in situ or sent to Alexandria or Asia Minor, certainly within an Alexandrian context, and they were taught their craft. As a result, when we take a close look, there are certain pieces which are technically exceptional, and others which are slightly askew. Obviously, this isn't visible from a distance, but from close up you can see it.
An expert in decorative arts, Jacqueline Denser discovers various new elements thanks to the well-preserved condition of the facades.
When we move closer to the facades, we notice that many of them have traces of a coating. We can see that all the parts which jut out from the setting were probably coated and painted, and in bright colors, as we can see some white, blue, and red. This means that the visual contrast would have been very effective seen from a distance, and the different layers would have stood out more. All this was done for show, to demonstrate the power, the wealth, and the prestige of the family.
These monumental tombs were therefore reserved for the leading Nabatean families in Egra. And yet on the surrounding hilltops, another team, led by Isabelle Sachet, has just discovered a number of simple rectangular holes dug into the rock. They were burial places for the inhabitants who didn't have the means to pay for anything more imposing. Inside the monumental tombs, the niches carved into the walls, called loculi in Greek, accommodated the remains of the deceased. This family vault, one of the biggest in Hegra, counts 29 burial places, with a number of smaller ones reserved for children. The tombs have been raided since antiquity, and there is nothing left, apart from a few inscriptions which provide valuable information. This one indicates that Awashabu reserved this place for himself, his two sons, his mother, his sisters, and their children. We also learn that this Nabatean originally came from Taima, 200 kilometers away.
There are 40 or so long tomb inscriptions, and several of these tomb inscriptions were made by women. And they say things like, one of the women is called Kam-Kam, and she says that this is the tomb which Kam-Kam made for herself and for her daughter and for her grandchildren. It's clear that women were making tombs, had the power to buy the property and to commission a mason to make a tomb in their own name, and then they would set up an inscription which made it clear that it was their own property. And these are legalized inscriptions, or legalistic inscriptions, which give rules about who can and who cannot be buried in the tomb. And it's clear that sometimes only women could be buried in particular tombs. So this implies that women had maybe more role than you would quite expect.
So here's what we're looking for. You see, in this one there are two betels, not just one. The betels were representations of deities for the Nabateans. They are in the form of a simple stone, which is called aniconic, because there are no figurative designs on them. They're not sculptures with faces, etc. So each betel represented a divinity, which means that if there are two of them in a niche, that represents two deities.
These are essentially stone blocks, and in northwest Arabia at this time there was a tradition of representing deities as plain stone blocks. There was a kind of inhibition against representing a god as a statue. It wasn't a kind of religious taboo, but it was a reluctance on the part of the Nabateans to represent gods as statues. This reluctance, of course, became a rule later in Islam, as it was already in Judaism.
There are three of them, a big one and two small ones. There's a tendency to believe that the middle one, the largest, represents Dushara, the Nabateans' main god, who is something of a dynastical vocation. And we can imagine that the Betels on each side are lesser divinities. They are deities that are associated with Dushara. There is nothing that enables us to say if the middle one or the ones on either side are masculine or feminine deities. But we do know from various inscriptions that female deities did exist for the Nabateans, in particular one by the name of El Usa, and which is often represented with 2 eyes and a nose in the middle of the betel.
The goddess Al-Uzza, her name is an Arabic form name, and it means the mighty one, the mightiest one. And she apparently represented the planet Venus, so she is an astral goddess. She's sometimes in inscriptions equated with the Greek goddess Aphrodite. There are a number of other deities, and there is no systematic pantheon. There is no source that we have that tells us how they're all related to each other.
The design of the niche depended above all on the taste of the person who had made it, and on his purse too, because a small niche, like that one to the side there, which is much more simple, would cost less to make than this one. These 2 inscriptions mention the stoneworkers who no doubt worked on the 2 niches to the side here. And in fact, we have the name of the man who was called Rabez Malkou. And it says he was a sculptor, a stonemason. The term is somewhat generic. And Shalan means, may he be safe and sound. So it's a message from the sculptor who leaves his signature to say that he created these 2 niches to the side. The Nabateans' literary corpus comprises about 5,000 texts, 90% of which are signatures, simple graffiti, written by people who carved their signature into the rock, much like the graffiti we see in our streets today. It was the ancient equivalent of our modern urban graffiti. The other 10% is essentially epitaphs, or inscriptions which give the name of the deceased, and religious dedications, specifying that a particular betel represents a certain divinity who begat so-and-so, etc.
In fact, this tomb was abandoned at this stage because of one of the merlons, which are the stone steps on each side of the tomb at the top. They broke one here and were obliged to abandon the tomb. This illustrates to a certain extent the difficulty of this kind of rock working, where you can't break the stone. Once it's broken, and you stop working. The method of gradually extracting the blocks is very simple, but it does require a certain technical dexterity. One leg is on the outside, here, and one leg inside, and the quarryman digs out the trench to the depth desired. Once the block is surrounded, as we can see, they dig out slots at the base, holes in which iron wedges are placed, and it's the pressure of these wedges that release the blocks. After that, the blocks are dropped down below onto piles of sand so that they don't break and they can be recovered.
If the Nabatean tombs were also used as quarries, what happened to all the blocks of stone? The question obsesses the archaeologists as they search for signs of any buildings that were constructed. Using a magnetometer, a map of the underground layers has been drawn up. It reveals the existence of a veritable urban layout. Hegra's residential area. A town lies dormant beneath the sand, waiting to be woken up. The French team has located part of the city. It could even be part of the ramparts. Unfortunately, the enthusiasm is cut short. The team is not yet authorized to begin the excavations. The Saudis themselves carry out the first surveys of the site, where the ancient dwellings supposedly lie. But once again, the results provide more doubts than certainties.
There really isn't very much, because in my opinion, if the town is actually there, it's closer to the wells, and the wells are all, without exception, in the western part of the site.
But one thing is certain, however. More than 2,000 years ago, the city of Hegra was a lush green oasis.
Joseph de Savignac and the Dominican priests who explored the site at the beginning of the 20th century discovered the wells that drew water from the phreatic table less than 10 meters below ground level. Today the wells are dry, and one can suppose that at some point between antiquity and the 20th century, the phreatic table level fell. With the Nabatean wells that were dug, you can hardly see the bottom sometimes, as they can be 15 or 20 meters deep. And so they easily capture the water and enable them to provide what was a very comfortable supply of water for a town of that size.
The scientists estimate that the residential area covered about 50 hectares of the total area of around 500 hectares.
There's a kind of mix of activities on the site. Activities that are directly linked to the terrain, and activities which were no doubt imposed by some other factor, and which we could call Nabatean culture. Wherever there were rocks, they used the rocks either for building tombs or for creating open-air religious spaces, as we can see inside the Jebel Ikhlib. There was a certain determination to impose and mark out the presence of the great Nabatean families, which built all the tombs. And that brings us back to forms of culture which were basically developed in Petra.
Look, Thomas, we can see the drainage channel for the water network.
The Nabateans asserted their culture to such an extent that they repeated in these mountains the same water collecting techniques used in Petra, with the channels cut into the rock and the reservoirs for gathering the rainwater. And although it rains much less here than in Petra, the oasis at Meden Saleh was never short of water. It's possible that the reservoirs also had another function and were used for religious purposes.
Look, it's a large room, a banquet hall. Here it was known as the Diwan, but it's quite simply what we'd call a triclinium, which means a room with 3 dining couches. Tri means 3, and klein is the Greek for couch. It was here that the Nabateans would meet with musicians and would drink wine as they ate, either in honor of the gods or a king or in honor of the deceased when it was associated with the tombs. And there you can see a small entranceway with stairs to the side.
Yes, on each side.
And here we have a large couch, and we can imagine that they lay down sideways and placed the dishes on that little ledge there. You see, there's a ledge. So they would have been lying above the banquet table and have put their plates down there and eaten. This is typical of such Nabatean installations, but in Meden Salah, there is only one like it, this one. Everybody who came for some kind of service would have come here to meet. There was only one large banquet hall, whereas in Petra, for example, there were 120.
Yes, it's completely different.
It's not at all the same system. Here there was one large room, and perhaps it was rented out, like a village hall. It was rented out on certain occasions to various gatherings. In Petra, there is a certain number of banquet rooms, like this one, where all the guests left their signatures on the walls, and we can see that there was some kind of turnover, and that the banquet room wasn't necessarily always used by the same family.
The participants at these festivities would wash themselves in basins placed inside the triclinium. 13 guests would take their places. It's said that the Nabatean king himself served his guests during official banquets, a hospitality ritual that is still practiced today in the world of Bedouin tribes.
شوي
You see? This inscription is magnificent.
They're two completely different things.
There's an inscription in Nabatean for sure, and then on the side, another inscription, no doubt in Northern Arabic. Nabatean writing left what I would call a prestigious legacy, because in all likelihood, it gave rise to Arab writing as we know it today. In the beginning, Arabic really emerged in the early 6th century AD, so it's a relatively late phenomenon. Before that time, before 512, the date of the first inscription, Arabic as a language wasn't really written with proper writing, but with notions that were borrowed, including from the Nabatean. The Nabatean language developed through the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries and clearly reveals how the characters evolved one by one into Arabic characters. Let us honor, no doubt with distinction, Betsethet Beth for Zaidu, who is the son of, with a Jim, Gad, Min, with fine ligatures, that's rare. You can see the ligatures where the moon should be simply like that, and in fact it must have been the stoneworker who did that. I think these inscriptions were made by the stoneworker who was working here, and that's the reason they are well carved. They don't look at all like the graffiti we've seen elsewhere, which are scrawled and ugly. This has been done with a proper tool, and there are ligatures everywhere. This line here isn't indispensable, and Kedam in front, usually. That expression is followed by the name of the deity, which is often Dushara, but this is clearly something else. Shin, Men, Yod, that would be the heavens. A god of the heavens in Nabatean? We've never seen that before.
I've got a theory that in practice what was happening in Nabatean religion was that they were moving towards a kind of monotheism. They did worship other gods, but gradually the other gods were becoming less and less important, and Dushara becomes the supreme god.
This is one of the finest Nabatean inscriptions on the site, apart from the ones on the tombs. It's magnificent. So what does it say? Balal Leki, here be commemorated Baja, and someone called Aidu, and another name Odemos, who are both Asav Tagaya. That means strategists.
The inscriptions at Hegra reveal the titles of high-placed personalities, such as strategists. These men were in charge of organizing and protecting the caravan traffic. At its height, the Nabatean kingdom would have been a veritable commercial empire covering the north of Saudi Arabia, southern Jordan, the Sinai, and the Negev. This vast area, crisscrossed by caravan routes, required sophisticated administration, which was headed by the royal authority in Petra. Beyond these well-preserved rock-hewn buildings, the presence of this royal power is also apparent in the center of Petra, where traces of stately edifices testify to an architectural program worthy of the finest Hellenist cities.
The monumental center of Petra suggests that the people were comfortably off, and even that they didn't shrink from investing substantial sums in building grand public and religious edifices. This initiative was no doubt due to 2 or 3 successive Nabatean sovereigns who insisted on that particular aspect. Perhaps it was from purely political motives, or it was aimed at bringing together and unifying the diverse elements of a population whose ethnic and cultural origins we don't fully understand.
Was the renowned Ghazni at the entrance to the city a form of royal signature? Even very recently, the question has raised a variety of responses.
Actually, there are more than 20 theories about dating of this facade and about the function of this facade. Some archaeologists, they say that this is actually a tomb. The other, they say this is a temple. Some, they say, no, this is from the 1st century BC. The other, they say, no, this is from the 1st century AD. Some, they say, this is Nabatean. The other, they say, this is Roman. So that is why we decided actually to excavate in front of it to know exactly what is this monument.
The Jordanian archaeologists have revealed a number of tombs at the foot of the Kasneh, similar to those in Hegra. In order to build this immense construction, the Nabateans had to reorganize the available space and notably cut the upper part of the tomb facades and close off certain tombs to provide access to the Kasneh. The original graves remained accessible, however, by a ladder. The interior was organized in such a way as to allow movement from one tomb to another by passing through the funeral chamber. This organization and design confirms that these are royal tombs and that Kasneh is a funeral temple built to honor the glory of the ruling dynasty.
For a while, they closed the door to the tomb to reorganize the space up above. But the visits would have continued. Yes, of course, they reorganized the tomb especially. The visitors went around the tomb and entered through that door there. This window allowed the light and air in. Yes, that's right.
In this way, the inhabitants of Petra could visit the tombs and honor the royal family. The discovery of these remains and of various ceramics and lamps has enabled the date of the building to be determined. The 1st century BC, during the reign of Aretas IV. 700 kilometers away, Laila picks up a small object from the sand. More than 2,000 years old, it revives the spirit of the Nabatean king, an ancient coin. These silver and bronze coins are today the only means of knowing what the Nabatean kings looked like, and of establishing a chronology of the reigns. The presence of the queen on certain examples testifies to the important status granted to women in the Nabatean civilization. After 3 weeks, the archaeological mission's investigation draws to a close. Laila is reluctant to leave the site. She is taking away vital new evidence, but leaving behind many unanswered questions, the most obvious of which concerns the identity of the city, hidden beneath the sands.
It's amazing with this old map of 1907 from Jossin-Savignac that we haven't had anything better to work with until relatively recently. So on the old map, are there new archaeological features which you've been able to identify?
Yes, quite a lot, especially in the Jebel Idlib area and also in the so-called residential area where all the city wall which goes around it is now visible. And so it was built of mud brick. And also the Nabatean inscriptions, we have been able to locate all the ones which are not carved on the facades of the tombs. I think now that the residential area included in the city wall is about 50 hectares, between 50 and 60. But we don't really know whether the whole area was inhabited or...
In the enigmatically vague history of the Nabateans, one fatal truth emerges, however. In the year 106 AD, the walls of the Sikh, which had protected Petra throughout the centuries, were powerless against the force of Emperor Trajan's Roman legions. The Nabatean kingdom became a Roman province.
Well, the usual assumption is that they did give up easily. There is no evidence of any great struggle when the Romans took over the state in 106 AD. But this assumption is a little bit based upon kind of prejudices that we have. I have a research student who is interested in the way that, and he's an Arab in fact, he's interested in the way that the history of events like this is written by the conquerors. And according to the history written by the conquerors, this was a peaceful liberation which took place when the Romans took over Nabatea. It's not entirely believable that it was so peaceful, and there is very little evidence, but at least we ought to be aware of the fact that the only evidence we have is the Roman evidence, the Roman version of events.
The powerful presence of the Roman Empire would change the face of Petra. Streets were lined with columns and the layout of the buildings reorganized. The influence of Rome distorted Nabatean history. The French team that's been excavating at the well-known Qas El Bint site is investigating this crucial problem. The great Nabatean temple devoted to Dushara reveals a sandstone building constructed with great care and covered with stucco. It even included anti-seismic elements composed of juniper beams. As a result, a substantial part of the building is still intact, despite several earthquakes that destroyed the entire central part of Petra in the 4th century AD. But many Nabatean elements remain hidden, eclipsed by the Roman relics which today emerge from the excavations.
Ah, you've set it up. At last we can admire it. It's a good likeness. It really looks like Marcus Aurelius. And in contrast, the first head suggests Lucius Verus.
The face of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, finely sculpted in marble, resembles part of another statue found on the site several years ago, and which appears to be a likeness of Lucius Verus. Antony's two sons were co-regents of the empires between 161 and 169 AD. These discoveries provide a date for the Roman monument which covers the Nabateans' former home.
It must have been huge.
Must have been 4 meters 50.
4 meters 50, yes.
4 or 5 meters.
After these events in 106 AD, the Nabateans continued to exist. They didn't disappear. And indeed, we've got instances later in the 2nd century when an individual calls himself a Nabatean. People were still calling themselves Nabatean even after their state had disappeared. So one can imagine the situation of a dispossessed people who still were conscious of their own noble history and tradition. Maybe they even had some hope of a restoration of their kingdom, but that no real effort was ever made to restore the kingdom.
A sculpted tomb testifies to a survival of the Nabatean style after the Roman conquest, thanks to an inscription, one of the very few found in Petra, that enables the monument to be dated and the deceased to be identified. He was not Nabatean, but Roman, Sextius Florentinus, a governor of the province of Arabia, who died in 129 AD. Impressed by the rock-bound culture of these masters of the desert, the Roman governor had his own tomb built in the same fashion. He created an eternal resting place on equal terms with the Nabatean monarchs, with the men who had found meaning and sense in the seams and strata beneath the rippling surface of the desert rock.